think I may have fixed the issues. Kuro, are you still there? Could you tell me if this sounds okay? Does, like, audio-wise, does this sound distorted at all? Because I was having issues with major distortion. Hey, copy. So if anyone can tell me if it sounds okay. It works. Great. Okay, fan dabby dozy. I see my levels are a bit crap though. Let me fix that up. There we go. Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to ShowX Live on VTWRussians.com. Thank you so much for joining today. Sorry for the late start. I tested, so after last week's issues, and sorry everything looks a bit screwed up, I'll explain that in a second. So after last week's issues, which were basically, I tried to open OBS, and before it would even open, I had an error that said, there was just some obscure error code, and I was like, that's weird. So I tried to, you know, this is about 45 minutes before the show, I was like, I've got time, I can fix this. So I uninstalled OBS, I reinstalled OBS, same issues. I tried to update graphics card, and it said to me, yeah, your graphics card's out of date. And I was like, oh, okay, what version am I on? And it said, version, I don't know, version 2 years ago. And I was like, what the hell? Turns out that the Windows updates that I ran the night before, so last Saturday, absolutely killed it. It just deleted everything. It just said, hey, you know what would be fun? Deleting your graphics card drivers. So I was like, okay, no problem. I'll just download them and reinstall them. I've got 40 minutes left till the show. No problem at all. And so I told it to start downloading, and it said, yeah, we'll be done in an hour and a half. And I was like, oh, for God's sakes, I'll be halfway through the show. Turned out it was actually 2 hours it took. So it's a good thing I didn't rely on that, because I missed the whole show downloading graphics drivers. So OBS didn't run because there wasn't any graphics drivers, because Windows 10 decided, hey, drivers suck. Let's just stick with default Microsoft crappy drivers. So that was last week. Right now, I was like, okay, I've got like 50 minutes to the show. I tested earlier this week. I saw that I could stream okay on my own account, so no problem. I'll just go. It should work. And I started playing some Leo, as you heard. Fantastic, beautiful, amazing Leo is just the best thing ever. And I started playing that, and it just started distorting like crazy. Like every 3 seconds, it was just like either it was distorted so heavily that it like stopped itself. It just stopped working. So I was like, oh crap! Did it do the same to my audio drivers? So I went and tested those. It seemed okay. I've tried doing like 20 different things, like trying to fix, try different Windows updates again. Like maybe there was more there I was needed or something, and I tried a whole variety of stuff, and nothing was working. And I was like, oh, let me see the audio quality. It was still set to max. I set it back to the normal one and then put it back to max quality again. Now it's working. I don't know what the issue was, but that seems to have fixed it. So apologies for the dumbness that is Windows 10. I can't really do much about Microsoft sucking sometimes. So that's that fixed. Yeah, it is a pain to override some Windows 10 drivers. And what's worse is when they override the up-to-date drivers. That's just weird. Streamlabs is good. We use OBS with Restream. Restream is what we use. So it pushes out to YouTube and to Twitch. And I think we can do it elsewhere as well. I think we're also on Alpha Geek Radio by default, but I think that scrapes it from our Twitch or something. So yeah, this is going out everywhere. All the streams. And you should never cross your streams, guys. Never cross your streams. So thank you for listening, and this is ShowX live on VTWProductions.com. And as usual, because of, well, partly because I'm me, right? But also because I was doing all the errors, I have not prepared for the show. So, GLHF. So what happened with me in the past week? Of what was of interest, in a way. I have some good news and some bad news. Let's do the bad news first. So, on Sunday, last Sunday, was the deadline for a lecture position in my department that I wanted. There was 5 slots available, so I thought, hey, I've got a good shot here. You know, generally speaking, you need to have, 3 to 5 years of postdoc, so post-PhD experience, to get your grips with the research and to really establish yourself as a standalone researcher before you become a lecturer, if you so please to do that. I decided, hey, let's try and skip this rung on the career ladder. And yeah, I gave it a good shot. My CV was really up to scratch. I got verified by so many of my kind peers who helped me out. I got my cover letter up to scratch. I got a rather thorough research plan sorted. I also have a teaching plan sorted to say how I... Just a sort of like description of how I teach, how I can improve my teaching and my philosophies with teaching and such. So I had all that together, submitted all that stuff. And within 2 days, I heard back. My head of department very kindly came by my office and said, look, I know you applied for the position. I thought I'd tell you in person before anything official comes out. You're not going to be shortlisted. You just don't meet the essential criteria because obviously you've not done your postdoc, etc. So he said, but if it makes you feel better, you actually were still ranked higher than a lot of people who met the essential criteria. I guess my secondary stuff was pretty high. I had a lot of teaching hours and my research is okay. So all that together, it was a bit of a downer. But thankfully that very morning that happened, I think that was Wednesday, I got told I've been rejected from the position, sadly. But that very morning, I also got an email from a conference that I submitted my paper to a couple months ago. It's a conference called GECCO, G-E-C-C-O, and it stands for, I don't actually know what it stands for. What does GECCO stand for? The Genetic and Evolutionary Computation Conference. Okay, fairly obvious. So, yeah, evolutionary computation, this type of AI. And this is like the best conference in my field. Like, just the best. So, I was like, I submitted my paper here on like a whim, sort of thinking like, oh, it's probably not good enough, but you know, I want to give it a shot. I want to try to get the best thing out there. Like, well, not the best, right? The best would be a journal. Journals are the best thing, but journals are pretty hard and not really expected for PhD students to do that. But this is absolutely the best conference I can get into. Generally speaking, it goes like, in computing science for research, it goes like workshop papers. Well, sorry, posters, workshop papers, conference papers, journal papers. A journal paper is like severely disrupting to the field, really big impact. You've shown that your research is thorough, well analyzed statistically, and you've like proven that you've made a huge contribution to the field. It's like a major thing. A conference paper can vary from pretty much... There's a lot of bad conferences out there. There's a lot of good ones too. And a good conference paper is... This is a novel contribution to the field. It's not going to be disrupt everything, but it's good work that is improvable statistically and well written, and yeah, it's pretty good. A workshop paper is usually preparatory work, like, but I plan to do this. Here's an outline of what I'm planning to do, and that's kind of workshop paper. And then a poster is like the before that. I have a vague idea of what I want to do. Here's some pretty pictures. And everybody puts stuff into all 4 streams, right? It's okay for like a professor to still do posters as well as to do journal papers, right? It's still expected to do a little bit of everything. But as a PhD student, I'm really only expected to do posters, workshop papers, and conference papers. Journal papers would be a big, not an excess, but it'd be. I mean, I'm particularly fantastic if I was doing that, and I'm not particularly fantastic. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with the fact that I got into the pretty much the top conference in my field, and that really cheered me up and really softened the blow of getting rejected from the job. However, that means that the thing I was most leaning towards for my career plan is now gone, and I'm now leaning heavily on my backup option, which was a post in London. So we'll see how that goes. I think I need to get a new backup is probably the best decision here. It's so scary at the end of a PhD, at the end of any degree, really, because your funding's going to dry up soon, and you're looking at this like you're like, yay, I got a degree. Oh crap, I have no money. I have no security. I have no idea what's going to happen in the next like 2 months. Never mind the next year or 5 years. You know, so. I've been offered a few 2-month positions here and there, which is really kind of a lot of people to offer me these things. But I really want to try and get something with a bit more, stability. 2-month here and there is a bit scary. Scary and hairy. So that was some good news and some bad news. That means that because it's a conference, you're supposed to go along and present your work. You're supposed to say, "Hey, I wrote this paper, and you should see this. People should see this paper. People should understand it, and I should explain it to them." So I need to go along to Prague in the Czech Republic. I've never been there before. I've never been to the country, never mind, and I've also never been to the city, of course. So I'll be doing that in July. It's about 6 days I'll be away for. And I'll be skipping one show or possibly calling in from Prague. That'll be cool. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be good fun. The only thing is, it's due 2 weeks. The conference is 2 weeks before my thesis deadline, so that'll be fun. So let's see what's going on with the chat. How are you guys doing? Hando says, I was just streaming Subnautica for my nephew for the past hour. Oh, that's sweet. That's really nice. Was he enjoying it? Subnautica is a very pretty game, and it's one that I have not given nearly enough time. I really want to play it at some point, but it's not at the top of my list. Kuro says, yes, a pain to override some Windows 10 drivers. Yes, it is. Windows 7 is still the best. It's because it's not new ground, you know. It's been kind of covered, you know. That's why the military and stuff in most countries still use Windows 7, because it's pretty secure, you know. At this stage, it's been tried and tested. Copy says, not prepared, too young. I'm not too young. Well, I suppose I probably am, actually. A 27-year-old lecturer would be pretty young. I mean, I already have students who are double my age who are sort of like, who's this kid? So I imagine if I was actually a lecturer, not just doing lecturing, it would be a bit much. And yes, Gecko, but Gecco. Kuro says, just need to get a couple of Titan RTXs or Radeon 7s to do your own AI development. We don't actually use graphics cards for our AI stuff, interestingly, but it's different types of AI. They have different requirements, different needs. Some have a huge requirement of memory. Some need a lot of processing. And generally speaking, graphics processors aren't actually necessarily made to do the kind of AI that we do. Processors are fine, so we tend to use i7s. That's it. Admittedly, there are obviously better ones out there we could use, but we use i7s. So I received a request earlier this week that to explain something that I barely understand, but I am happy to do so, or to try my hardest. So Hando made a request. I put on Twitter on Friday. I said my mind was blown by a guy called Dr. White and his student Ben Jones at a seminar today. Quantum mechanics are in equal parts terrifying and fascinating. Quantum computing must be such an interesting field to work in. And Hando responded to me saying, are you going to be talking about this on the show? So, yeah, I can do a overview, but I haven't prepared anything. And I sadly don't have access to the slides that they showed, because that'd be quite useful. And I'll try to do it in a way that so the first thing is, right, nobody understands quantum computing, right? Oh, sorry, that's not true. Nobody understands the quantum mechanics that quantum computing uses, right? We understand that they exist, and we know that so there's this thing in testing called a black box, right? And a black box is quite a simple idea. Like you'll have seen it in probably primary school maths. It's the idea of x, right? If you have a formula that says 2 plus 3 equals x, you know that x is 5, right? Well, you could also say 2 plus x equals 5. And you'll say, okay, well, in this case, x is 3, right? Now, the problem with quantum computing is you're doing a kind of... You're handing x 2, and you get 5 back, but you might also get 3 back, or 1 back, or something between... In reality, it's between 0 and 1 in this case, right? So you don't know why it's... You don't know how the mechanism works, but you know the range in which it will potentially return something. So, for those who haven't seen it, go watch the slit experiment on YouTube. It'll explain it so much better than I possibly can. But in fact, let me explain this slit experiment first before we go any further. From what I understand, and feel free to correct me, because I am no expert. This has nothing to do with my field whatsoever. The slit experiment is this amazing, completely, utterly interesting thing that has been studied by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of physicists and computing scientists and other specialists for decades, right? This is a known observation that we still can't really explain fully at all. And basically, think of a photon, right? A bit of light, like the smallest bit of light that you can really look at. Now, a photon is either a particle or a wave, right? Light can be described as a wave as well as a particle. Now, think of a slit in, say, like you have some cardboard or some sort of really dark material. I don't know, like some dark cloth or something, right? And say you have this dark cloth and you put 2 slits down it, right? So it goes cloth, slit, cloth, slit, cloth, right? So there's 2 potential streams that light can go through. So what you do is you get a really specialized laser or a torch, preferably a torch. And what you do is you point it at this bunch of stuff, right? You say towards the slits and stuff. And this really special torch, or this really special laser, will, when you turn it on, only shoot a single photon, right? A single photon. So you don't, it can only go to one place, right? It's one photon. It can't just spread around in theory. Now, what happens if you don't watch it? If you just watch from afar and you turn the light on, the light will seem to go through both slits and act in that manner. Now, as soon as you observe it, as soon as you put down like a special camera or some kind of mechanism for humans to be able to really see the particle and watch it from there, it will only go through one. And which one it goes through is random. It's pretty much half the time it'll go through one, half the time the other. And you'll say, what? What's changed? And this is what's known as the observer effect. As soon as we pay attention to it, the quantum mechanic changes. There's a thing in physics that as soon as you pay attention to it, it changes. That's the crazy thing. Now you think to yourself, well, clearly this is bull crap, right? This is not true. There is just clearly some misunderstanding. You just aren't getting it. The person who designed this experiment is an idiot, right? That's clearly what you're thinking. But this has been replicated like 1 billion times. This is done over and over and over. And particles have different types of particles have different types of quantum mechanics. And there's different types of things that happen that are known to be quantum in nature. One such quantum effect is when you look at a particle that has some positive energy or some kind of energy going around it. If you pay attention to that energy, you can only ever know the speed of it or where it is, but never both. Because as soon as you look at it, you change its characteristics. And this is the strange thing with quantum. It makes us, this is just where science is sort of like, I don't know yet. We have no idea. We don't quite understand it yet. Another really interesting phenomenon of quantum that we have yet to understand is called entanglement. And the idea is 2 particles of some sort can become entangled. And that means kind of what you think it is, like crossing over each other, some kind of shared bond, right? We don't quite understand what that, I don't think we understand what that bond is. I might be wrong there. But we've got these 2 particles that are somehow entangled. And what that means is when one is affected, the other is also affected. So if one moves, the other moves. Now you may think to yourself that there's some sort of string, like a string of atoms or something connecting them. Or maybe it's like magnetic, or I don't know, something, right? There's no measurable thing that's doing this, but somehow when you move one, now this is the crazy part, the other one moves instantaneously. There is no time period between this one moving, then the next one moving. And so far, no distance has changed this. So we've managed, I don't know what let me see, let me Google this. Length of entanglement. So far, we've done many tests to furthest length of entangled atoms. Okay, so here's a question asked on the Physics Stack Exchange. Is there any theoretical limit to the distance at which particles can remain entangled? And the top comment says, once 2 particles entangled, they remain so at any distance, so long as you do nothing which would push them to lose coherence, whatever that may be. Don't worry about that. We're not going to touch on that. So, so far as we can tell, no matter the distance of these two entangled atoms, if you move one, the other one moves. And that means that we can have instantaneous communication anywhere in the universe. Right? We don't need to rely on light or sound or anything else. Just these two atoms that are entangled, that one moves, the other moves. That's ones and zeros, right? If you could do ones and zeros, you can translate that into anything. You can translate that into a language like we do. Look in front of you, right? Light, audio, text, video, whatever. We can do that. And so, if you ever read any sci-fi, the idea of an Ansible, right? This is a thing that's quite common in some sci-fi where you have like a spaceship that has an Ansible device that is basically has an atom that is entangled to another one light years away, which would be impossible to communicate normally with. But if you use the Ansible, it's instantaneously. So you're talking to somebody actually faster than we can, right? If you're standing next to somebody and speak to them verbally, the sound waves, the molecules in the air between you, the two of you, vibrate and pass that sound along in a wave, right? And that actually takes infinitely more time than entanglement does to communicate, because that is instantaneous. So that's another supremely interesting, terribly crazy mechanic of quantum physics. So I don't understand this at all, right? But not only that, nobody understands it, right? Literally nobody on this planet, not even the number one theoretical physicist on this planet, has any idea how this works. It is freaking magic right now. It is the darkness that science is trying to bring light to. But the observer effect is the thing that really screws it up. Now, a little bit more about what we said before in this Stack Exchange there, which is about a great website for quantum entanglement. They said that while entanglement is independent of distance, these two particles can lose coherence. And that basically means that there's some kind of interference that knocks them off balance and they're no longer entangled. Right? If that happens, it's screwed. We're done. Now, to hold an atom in place is an incredibly difficult thing anyway. Right? It's an incredibly tough thing to do. And that's one of the reasons we really struggle with nuclear fission, right? So, long story short, we are at this is one of the most interesting things with physics right now. We are so far away from understanding it, but the minute somebody cracks quantum, right? Once we understand how that works, we're gonna have our science production is just gonna go through the roof, near infinite levels of technological improvement. And now this is just in general, right? Like space flight will become a completely different issue. Fuel, energy will be an entirely different issue. We will be able to fuel the entire world's energy reserves for thousands of years with just a few factories once we've cracked quantum. The potential for it is insane. Now, this is something we've observed. We know it exists to some extent, but we don't know how to make it work in our benefit quite yet. We can't quite use it. We just know that we can observe it, we can see it happening, but we can't quite get it. All right, let's look at the IRC before I go into quantum computing. That can be our break for now. Copy says, I made pants for Illidan, which is great because that's the only piece of clothing he wears. Okay. But what does show X equal? Oh, good point. The X in show X is whatever we talk about, which is usually a lot of crap. Hando says there are lots of slit experiment videos on YouTube that are really bad. Do you have a favorite one? Show X equals bees, says Hando. I've seen several as well. There's a few full-length documentary type videos on the slit experiment and on quantum mechanics that are really interesting. I'd have a look at those rather than trusting the 2-minute YouTubers. Like look for verified sources of real physicists, preferably theoretical physicists, because this is so far mostly theoretical stuff. We can observe the effects, but all of our knowledge of how this works and the effects of it working are very much theoretical. Okay, so you'll want to listen to those guys because they're the smartest guys thinking about it. Hando says reality is a sim. We just need to face it. It might be. Copy says it's like when an animal is doing something cute until you grab your camera. That's very true. I tried to do it with the dogs this weekend. I was trying to do the super slow-mo on my phone with the dogs jumping after their toys. And every time I started videoing, they would stop jumping and just wait for the toy to land near them, then pick it up. Of course. It's like when you move into your kitchen and your pet follows you. I'm really bad at analogies. Says Copy. You're funny, though. Hando says, we may starve to death on Mars, but we'll be able to play Cards Against Humanity until we die. Yeah. Yeah. And Copy says, quantum entanglement sounds like an exotic dance. Kind of a sexy one. A sexy robot. A sexy robot physics dance. Okay. Right, that's our break. Now, we've talked about quantum in general, and you kind of get the idea that we don't really understand it, right? But we can use it. We can make it happen, and there are multiple examples of it, of it happening. And there's videos of this, and you can actually use a quantum computer online. I believe Google and IBM offer some public access. However, as we discussed at the seminar on Friday, the cost of these computers to run is astronomical. Generally speaking, it's at least 6 figures, but generally 7 to 8 for these quantum computers, for real quantum computers. Now, when I say real, I mean not simulated or emulated, right? So a quantum computer. So first of all, you need to understand how computers work, right? Computers use binary 0 to 1, and they do that because it's much easier to tell if power is going through something than to measure the amount of power going through something. Now, if you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of little mini circuits that can be on or off, right? That's really easy to measure. But if you're trying to say it's exactly like 0.5 volts, 0.6, 0.66, 0.667, or whatever, that's incredibly difficult, and they're very liable to break or to be not quite as good quality, and that becomes a really difficult thing to do, right? And it makes the hardware really, really prone to breakage or to not being quite accurate or screw-ups. So we use binary being 0 and 1 on and off. Right? That's the best mechanism we have to do that. So what we do with zeros and ones is then translate that into either other numbers or letters and characters. And we do that by, in fact, let me use the text function on the screen so you guys can follow along, and it can be like I'm doing a lecture. Okay. So, if we have, for example, right, that's in the wrong place. Let me just change the location and make it a little bit bigger. Okay. Back at the top of the screen right now. Right? We've got 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. Now that means nothing to anybody right now, right? It's useless. So what I'm going to do is add a second line, or move this down to the next line so I can do this, and it's going to really explain this for us, right? This one here represents 1. This one here represents 2s. This one here is 4s. Oops, 4s. And this one here is 8s. Okay? And then so on for 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. And you're starting to hear these numbers and you're thinking, wait a minute, they're clicking some bells in my mind. Memory sticks, or memory in a processor, or RAM or whatever, right? 512 meg, 1024 gigabytes. Like, why are these numbers being used? It's because they're powers of 2, right? That's the basis of it. So what we have here is a bunch of numbers which can now be made into something useful, right? A bunch of zeros and ones, and we can, if we add these together, right, we can now see, let me give it more space, we can now see that, 8 plus 4 plus, oops, I did an asterisk, 8 plus 4 plus 2 plus 1 is going to equal 12, 14, 15, right? So that's 15. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1 means 15, right? We have a mechanism now for using binary into anything. And now if you told me that 15, let's just say 15 equals A, right? And say 16 meant B and 17 meant C, you can now get letters and characters, right? And if you can do this, you can do pretty much anything, right? Now that we have a mechanism for working out numbers and working out binary, we can now work out anything. And that's the premise of this. That's the premise of binary, and that's how computers on the most basic level That's how they work. Okay? Okay. What a tangent we're going on. So that's how zeros and ones work. That's how binary works. That's how we store information there. All right. So how does quantum work? A quantum bit, where a bit being a 0 or 1, instead of us knowing that it's going to store a 0 or 1, all we know is it's going to store something between 0 and 1 pretty much with equal probability. Right? So it can be a 0, it could be 0.5, it could be 0.7555, or anywhere in between 0 and 1. And we don't know which it's going to be. Right? We don't know. And pretty much the entirety of quantum computing is built on this premise of, technically speaking, it can be and will with all equal probability be any one of those numbers. Now the issue is, I've been talking here as if it's only one of them. The truth is, when we run a quantum computer, and you do this by basically getting a molecule, you trap it in some kind of like magnetic field or something, right? And that's the thing that's really expensive here. It's really tough to do this, right? And it's easily knocked out, so it's easily screwed up. But say we have this molecule stored in this field, and what we're going to do is repeatedly measure the spin of the molecule, right? Or the energy going around it, or any other interesting quantum phenomenon that as soon as we observe it, it changes, right? That changes what its potential is. But when you don't observe it, technically that's every answer is correct, right? So it's not a case of the bit is 0 or 1 or somewhere in between. It's actually all of them. Every single possibility, every single in between of 0 and 1 is all happening at once when we don't observe it. Right? So that bit is storing every potential answer to 0 and 1. So what we can do, theoretically, is once we can crack the actual quantum mechanic of it, where the problem is the observer effect in this case is when we look at it, it only becomes one value. And that's a problem. We know that it actually stores every single value within it, between 0 and 1, but when we look, it only becomes 1. We've affected it by observing it. Now, if we can somehow, crack this quantum effect, we can instead get every single answer back. Which means we can eventually ask it questions. We can eventually say things like, okay, if we use these multiple bits, right, so several of these, to represent some values, like say, I don't know, say you're trying to work out the optimal flight schedule for Gatwick Airport, right? That is a really, really tough thing to work out. The amount of sums involved of every single plane coming and going, the cleaning schedules, the food deliveries, when passengers should get on, when they should get off, when the plane should approach the airway or when they should take off. All that stuff it's a task that's literally impossible to work out, right? It'll take a normal computer tens of thousands of years to calculate that kind of thing, which is not viable. So we tend to, in real life, we just tend to use some algorithms, which is what I specialize in, to just get an answer that's good enough, right? We'll say, oh, it's like 90% the best that we could possibly do, that'll do, right? It's pretty good, and we can get a good answer fairly quickly. But getting the best answer is practically impossible. With quantum computing, we could ask the question, what is the ideal way of doing this? And if we can crack the observer effect problem, we can get back every single answer. Every single one. We can say, here's the possible potential for every single problem here. The whole landscape of solutions. Right? That means we get the best answer and every other potential alongside it. And you can do that with pretty much any question that we can formulate. Any mathematical question that can be raised. We can get an answer back. No matter how difficult, how complex, or how much computing time it would normally take to run these the questions and answers. That is insane, right? The potential for that's called an oracle, by the way. They call that an oracle in QC, quantum computing. That's the oracle effect. And that means you can answer pretty much anything, right? Like, not literally anything. You need to be able to formulate the question. Like that, like the sort of old Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy type thing of, what's the answer to everything and anything, right? It's 42. The problem in reality is that question we couldn't even formulate it, right? That we would need to know where every single atom is in the universe, write it down, and then give it to a computer that's got enough quantum processing to handle that. It's impossible, right? We couldn't do it. But if we can do it with other problems that we can actually formulate that are on our scale, then that's insane, right? The potential there is just fascinating. And that's really why quantum computing is getting so much of a focus, because there's so much theory being done on this, and we've got some progress with it. And in fact, quantum computing has actually solved some simple problems without breaking the observer effect phenomenon, sadly. But it has actually managed to solve some problems on a very basic scale better than classical solvers. So the way that we use normal computers, the way that we use calculators, etc., has actually failed in comparison to quantum computing in some cases, which is pretty cool, right? Like, even if we haven't broken the general thing, it's still generally a useful thing to look into, it seems like, which is good. But just imagine that we actually cracked it, right? The potential there is insane. So because we haven't actually cracked it yet, and because, most importantly, it's so incredibly expensive and difficult to capture a molecule like that and then measure its quantum effect, whatever that may be, what people start doing, and a lot of computing scientists are doing, is they're building virtual quantum computers. So they have software that they've written inside of your normal Windows 10 or whatever computer, right? And you've made it so that as it runs, it will return an answer between 0 and 1 that we don't know what it is, and then we can ask it questions and it can give us answers. And this gives us some kind of mechanism to test what would happen and advance the science, right? We can say, well, this is what it would do. It would give us one of these answers anyway. We're kind of emulating it, but it's still mostly going to be, it's 99. I don't even give it a number. It's probably right, so we can emulate it. And so a lot of quantum computing, QC, is done on emulated computers, because otherwise it costs an insane amount. Now, let me just see how much it costs to rent a quantum computer. Okay, so D-Wave Sys oh no, they don't seem to be actually having any. That's the thing, they don't have any they don't seem to have any actual figures, because I think it's at a level that you can't really think about the price. So this is an article from Wired. And it says, quantum computing is at its most esoteric. It is experimental, enormously complex, sometimes downright confusing technology that's typically the domain of hardcore academics and organizations like Google and NASA. But that might be changing. Today, this is 3 years ago, IBM unveiled an online service that lets anyone use the 5-qubit, so that's 5 bits that are quantum, right? So 5 between 0 and 1s. Quantum computers its researchers have erected at a research lab in Yorktown Heights, New York. You can access the machine over the internet via a simple software interface, or at least that's simple if you understand the basics of quantum computing. So you need to be able to ask it questions, I believe, in a near machine language type language, right? But it's quantum machine language, so it's a bit more difficult. This new service is hardly something the everyday consumer will use, but it's a big deal for the many researchers now working to build a practical quantum computer, a computer that moves beyond just ones and zeros to become exponentially more powerful than today's machines. In that sense, IBM is indeed striving to bring quantum computing to the world at large. Okay, so thank you very much to Wired for that article. So that's the basic premise behind quantum computing. Okay, that's what I understand anyway, and like I said, I barely understand the basics behind it. I barely understand the quantum computing side, whereas nobody really understands the quantum side in general. Okay, but that's what we got so far. All right. So the IRC copy said zeros and ones. I've been using Hex since childhood to code my own Game Genie cheats. Nice. Didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. So Hex is quite interesting for anybody interested. So we talked about how binary is zeros and ones, right? Well, Hex is kind of similar, but what Hex is instead of it being zeros and ones, like let's just have the same as what we had before. But instead it could be anything, right? So it can be anything 0 to 9, but it's actually 0 to F, and I'll explain why in a second. So binary, being by 2, right, is only zeros or ones, meaning there's 2 potential units. Now we generally work in decimal, dec being 10, right? So we work between 0 and 9. The number 10 doesn't actually exist in our sort of alphabet, right? So instead of 10 existing, we just say 1 then 0. So 1 in the tens, 0 in the integers, right? So we don't actually have a number for 10. Hex solves that issue by going a step further. So instead of binary being 0 and 1 with 2 potential numbers, and decimal being 0 to 9 with 10 potential numbers, hexadecimal is 0 to 15 with 16 potential numbers. So let's calculate that number we got on the screen. Yeah, it'll be 4 zeros as before. So let's work at the very end. That is going to equal 1, right? Because 1 equals 1 in this case. And same in binary, actually. 1 equals 1 there. Okay. This next one, this second from the last one, is going to be worth 116. Okay? That's what that means. So if we just had this number, right? 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1. That would mean there's 116 and a 1. So that number is actually 17. That's what 1, 1 in hex means 17, strangely enough. Because that's a 10, effectively, in decimal, but this is in hex, which is the max is 15, so we go up to 16, and that's where that stores it, right? Now, how do we... So we worked out how to do 16 here, and then we worked out how to do 17 with the other one at the end, but how do we get, for example, 15? Well, that would be 0, and this becomes F. Now you think to yourself, what? Where did that come from? Where did F come from? And let's make this a little bigger because I realize it's quite small. So F it stands for 15. E is 14. D is 13. C 12. B 11. And A stands for 10. So when you're typing in hex, when you see this number, that number there, 000A, or just A really, that means 10. Right? That means 11. That means 12, 13, 14, 15. Then when you want to go up to 16, that goes down to 0, just like when you're going up to 10, and this goes up to 1, meaning 16. And that's how hex works. That's the premise of hexadecimal. Okay? Hex, a decimal, hex meaning 6, dec meaning 10, 6 plus 10, 16. Okay, what a crazy show this has been. So we're gonna have a teaching show.